Hey everybody, I told you the next part of my collection tour would be the tillage tools. First up is this Oliver walking plow, single-handled. Never been in the ground, and the story behind this one is, check out this decal. This is a number 1 ECSB. But my plowing runs strong in my family. It's meant a lot to us over the years. It meant a lot to a lot of farmers. And but my grandfather coached local 4-H kids to plowing contests and had great success with it, and coached at least 3 guys to local boys to national championships of the level land plowing contest. Let's see right here. Get this where there's not so much glare. This is Oliver's magazine that they put out, sent to their customers, called Better Farming, and that's George Linegar on the cover there with his wife and 2 sons. And he was one of the first ones Grandpa coached to a plowing championship. If we flip it open, there's Grandpa on the right, and George on the tractor. And congratulating George for winning the national plowing competition, which was a very big event back in its day. While doing some cleaning around the place recently, earlier this year I think it was, come across this piece here. There's George and his hat. Still even have a couple of those hats around. When George won the national contest, he got to represent the United States in the international contest. And the first time he did, he won twice actually. First time he got to go to Ireland. And when they were over there, that's where Grandpa found this plow. They did some, sightseeing in the area and went to a hardware store, and this Oliver walking plow was at this hardware store and had never been sold, and Grandpa bought it and had it shipped back to the US, which they were already shipping a tractor, which has another story of its own. I've got some pictures of this tractor from the competition, an Oliver 550, and George was telling me about 10 years ago I ran into George and got to talk to him quite a bit about this. And that 550, they took it down to the docks in Detroit to be shipped over ahead of time, and the plow. And then they flew over and got there like the day before practice started. And they roll in that night, and to find out that someone at the docks had decided if they tore this Oliver down, they could fit it into a smaller container. And so when it got over to Ireland, it was in pieces. And the officials at the plowing match there got them generators and lights. And fortunately, Grandpa had brought his American tool set. So no one over there had any tools to work on our SAE fasteners. And they spent the night with those generators, getting the tractor and the plow put back together and getting everything set up so that they'd be ready in time for practice the next day. Another story that George told me, the second time he got to represent the United States in the plowing contest, he went to Italy. And part of the festivities there was they got to meet the Pope. And so they're all in line, and George is the first one. And he goes up and he says, well, being a Midwestern Protestant boy, he didn't know what the procedure was for greeting the Pope. The Pope sticks his hand out and you're supposed to kiss his ring. George didn't know that, so he saw his hand and just grabbed it and gave it a good hearty Midwestern shake. Some people around the Pope kind of gasped, but the Pope himself kind of laughed about it, and everybody else in line shook his hand after that, and just everybody got a good chuckle out of it, I guess. This picture was given to me by a friend I went to school with. She found it on eBay. It's from a local newspaper. And that's Dad and Grandpa. Obviously Dad on the tractor, Grandpa standing, getting ready, adjusting the plow for competition. That is a 550 Dad is sitting on, which Dad did do some competing with that, I believe, but most of the time he used his Super 88 and the 4240 plow, which I still have both of those. This plow was rather unique. I've got other pictures of it. They went to South Bend to the Oliver factory and worked with the Oliver engineers down there to put together this plow for competition. And so it's kind of parts one plow, parts from another plow. It's nothing that was ever made in production. And I don't know whatever happened to it. Some people have told me it's still here on my farm, and if it is, it's hiding really good. But I've considered, with the pictures I've got of it, I think I could probably put one together that looks like it. Next up is my Oliver number 40 walking plow. Dad picked this one up at an auction. Always wanted to kind of try it out, but I don't want to have to get horses to do it. You can see, well, there we go. Get my shadow out of the way. Oliver Chilled Plow Works, South Bend, USA. South Bend, Indiana, USA. And that's where they were located. James Oliver was a Scottish immigrant who eventually located in the South Bend area and came up with better ways to make plows. John Deere is credited with making the first steel plow, but I always say Oliver was the guy that made them work. He created a process called chilling, which is essentially what we know as hardening now, but they would cast mold boards. And by chilling the backside more than the front side, but the front side some, doing this process correctly, they'd leave a soft core but a hardened surface. Oh no, I'm sorry, it would have been the front side that was hardened more. But by having that hard surface, the plow would shine up and the soil would slide across it much easier, take less power, but it would last longer too because it was harder. But the soft center gave some flex to the moldboard for hitting rocks and other debris that would keep it from breaking as easily. And whereas a regular steel plow, soil tended to stick to it, soft steel, and it just didn't work as good. And Oliver really revolutionized the plow industry with his designs, the shapes of moldboards, the hardening treatments, that kind of stuff that just really, they were called the plowmaker for the world. They shipped plows all over the world. And even made them for other companies, including Case and Ford. Which I do have an example of a Ford plow built by Oliver. Lettering is not quite as prominent on this side. Then this trolley, cart, whatever you want to call it, actually is it is from the factory there in South Bend. And after things had been all shut down and before the buildings were demolished, this was rescued by a friend, and I ended up with it. But it sure looks old, and who knows if it's old enough where this plow might have been, or parts of this plow might have been wheeled around on it in the factory back in its day. There's nothing really on it to signify that it was used at the factory. Let's see. So I can't quite read that. Something shop. But another cool little piece of Oliver history. Something I want to mention about this plow was it's a left-hand plow. It rolls the soil over to the left as you're going forward. And this plow was available as a left hand or a right hand. I asked someone one time why the difference. Really, I mean, you're still turning the soil over, but they said German immigrants preferred left-hand plows, just what they'd always had, and that's the way they worked. Other farmers preferred right-hand. And I imagine once your team of horses was used to plowing a certain way, you wanted to keep going that way. And then another question I often get, people will ask me what plow they have, and they'll see numbers on the back of the moldboard, and excuse me, often that just it tells you what the moldboard was, but every plow had several options of moldboards and other attachments to fit your requirements for your soil types, what you were trying to even do. So what's on the moldboard doesn't really tell you the model of the plow, it just tells you the model of the moldboard. Sometimes if you're lucky on these walking plows, it'll still be on the beam. If not, the best thing you can do is just try to cross-reference it with pictures of other models. But Oliver made a lot of walking plows like this. This is my one bottom Oliver number 134 plow. Really nice original shape. The wheels have been repainted, but short of that, boy, it just really did not get a lot of use. Someone took good care of it. Clutch lift. One of these days I'm going to get it out and try it, but so far I haven't. I've owned it for about 2 years now. Has the Oliver breakaway hitch, which there's a ring that couples into that bolts onto your hitch on your tractor. You back in and it snaps onto it with those springs. If you hit a rock or other obstacle, if there's enough pressure, the springs will trip and the claws will open and the plow releases, and your plow comes unhooked, but it also doesn't get broken. And then the rope that you trip your plow with, which is tied up here, you don't want to have that tied on too tight to your tractor, because it's going to break when the plow releases. Usually just like have a little piece of wire that hooks it over something, the back of the seat or something, and something that'll bend and give up easy. From the same person, I got this Oliver Model 100. Another nice, complete, low-use plow. Just things are not worn out on it. The tires are shot. Need to get around and get a set for that. You might remember this from my tractor tour video, and I threw the boat motor in there. Just kind of, it's a good place to mount it for now. But these had the famous Oliver rooster comb lift, and this part here would drop down into the wheel, down there into those cogs, and lift it out of the ground. A very effective lift mechanism. And then if you're wondering what the handles are for, this handle here closest to the furrow wheel adjusts the depth of that, and then the crank on the other side adjusts the depth of the land wheel so you can level your plow out. Most of the time it seems like these cranks are seized up from sitting out in the rain or whatever. This one is fully functional. This one's red with green wheels, which puts it prior to, I'm thinking it's 48. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong here. But for a while there, the tractors were green with red wheels and plows were red with green wheels. Each factory, Oliver factory, kind of had its own paint scheme, and then around 1948 they unified everything, and so these plows could be found in green with red wheels, or they could be red with green wheels depending on the age of them. So there's really no wrong paint scheme as far as which way to go with red or green. Later ones could be offered with a hydraulic lift. We have back here, this is a Model 100. This belongs to my friends the Wernets. It was originally a rooster comb lift plow, and then they had it converted to hydraulic when they sold or traded off their Oliver 70 for their 77, which had hydraulics. Oh, here's another Plowmaster 100, I do believe. But this one belongs to my friend Alan. He bought it at the same place I bought the one and the two bottoms that I just showed you. It was all painted up and everything. The guy that owned these plows, when he would get one, he would fix them up to whatever it took to get them back in plowing condition. And he did that with most of the equipment he bought. Get it back into working shape. This one's a two bottom. And it does look like it's ready to go to the field. Hydraulic lift. I would say it's factory hydraulic, because typically if it was rooster comb and converted, there'd be a hub down here that the rooster comb dropped into, and most guys would just leave that in there when they converted, and then add the hydraulic lift stuff on. And oh, I'll throw a picture from the literature in on this one, because, well, I kind of got her packed back in here. This is an Oliver TNT plow, and it was modeled or designed after the Model 100 as far as the basic design, but it had to be beefed up in different ways, because what the TNT was for was, if you look, you got your main bottom up front, and then they had a small subsoiler bottom behind. You could adjust the depth on it, and it was meant to break up the hard pan that would form after years and years of moldboard plowing at the same depth. This one, the back one, ain't even on. It's up here on the sitting on a frame. You can see how new some of this stuff is. I mean, look at the lettering on that share. Still paint on the rear subsoiler. So Oliver was a little ahead of their time on that. Look at the hitch, brand new, never used. Dad picked this up from a former Oliver dealer who had closed his doors and just never opened up again, even though he had merchandise out in the yard. And he finally had donated land to the church next door, and he needed to get some of this stuff cleaned up. And so he started selling things, and that's when Dad bought this TNT plow. Like I say, it's never been in the ground because it never got completely assembled. That's how unused it is. One of the telltale signs of a TNT plow is that heavy cast iron weight that the rear tail wheel, I mean, it's part of it, it's functional, but it's also there for weight to help keep this plow on the ground because it was working so deep. They did not catch on, because if your tractor was a 3-plow tractor, those 2 subsoilers down there turn your 3-plow tractor into a 2-plow tractor. And despite the extra work it was doing for you, when you went from 3 to 2, you lost a third of your day's productivity. That was a big thing back then. Well, losing a third of your productivity would be big. One bottom's width, 12-inch width, if that's what it's set up for. Losing that much today wouldn't make that much of a difference off a 30-foot wide implement. But when you're talking something that's only cutting 2 feet at a time, adding an extra foot on makes all the difference in the world. So it took more power with that extra shank in the ground. And so because of that, it didn't take off. So there's actually, I've come across a few that have never been used because they just couldn't get them sold. And then a lot of them they would, farmers would either torch or just unbolt that shank off the back and then use them as a regular 2-bottom plow so they could get their speed back up, or their width. Someday I've been working on it here and there, but I want to get this finished, put back together and cleaned up and painted up. There's just no, it sat outside all those years until, that was the late 80s, I think, when we bought it. So, and these would have been out in the late 40s, early 50s. So, you know, late 40s to late 80s, it sat outside for 40 years. It's amazing there's any paint left on it, but there are in a few spots. But the pieces that do have paint on them, like that hitch, he had kept those indoors because it hadn't been put together yet. He knew where all this stuff was after all that time. And there's a hitch ring. Grab the land side. But here's your hitch ring that engages the breakaway hitch. It clasps onto this, and then this part bolts onto your drawbar. That's brand new, never been used. And amazingly enough, while they're, especially one is beyond saving, both tires actually still hold air on it. They were soft, but I blew them back up. This one on the land wheel might be worth saving. It might be savable. It's an old BF Goodrich Silvertown, and so is the other one, but it just, that one went flat and was in the mud and it rotted. Like I say, it will hold air, but. So here we have Dad's 4240 competition plow. Sorry about the poor lighting in here. I got a flashlight. I've used this plow a few times. It was still all set up for plowing. There are 12-inch mold boards, but he took longer 16-inch shears and cut them back to meet the mold board. Those aren't your rare, I think those are 434 bottoms. I can't remember for sure. But things like this, see the washer stacked between the rim and the hub. Most people would have had the, well, and that somewhat depended on what the plow was set up for plowing width. You could get 12, 14, or I think even 16-inch bottoms on the 4240. And but just to fine tune it, got those washers in there between the rim and the hub. Other little tweaks. Supposedly this double catch here with the 2 pins is off a John Deere grain head or a reel, some kind of adjustment there. But what it did was it gave them half-notch adjustments, since there was 2 pins on it, to fine-tune it that much. And they were both hooked into the same rod, so when you pulled up on it, it would pull both pins up, and you could but you could basically essentially move it a half a notch by having the 2 pins. I got the guide pin that comes down here to point. You can aim that right at the land to make sure you're cutting the right width on your front bottom. One thing that was on it that I did take off was there was wire that came from each coulter up here. It was wrapped around there, and it came back, kind of looped around the end of the mold board and came over the top and come around the back there. And what that piece of wire would do is any residue, stubble, grass, whatever you want to call it, it would grab that and tip it over before the slice had made its full turn to make sure everything got covered. Because in these competitions back then, they wanted absolutely nothing on top. And then the other thing this is adjusted for, he went to Dad won the national contest twice. First time he got to go to Toronto, or just outside of Toronto, to represent the United States. And I will put a link in to a video here on YouTube that shows him. There's 2 different time indexes, and I'll try to link those correctly. But He used this plow, but he did take a brand new 770 that Oliver supplied. I thought he'd taken that Super 88 until I saw this video, and well, the proof's in the pudding. He obviously didn't take a Super 88. Just joiners on the discs, just all sorts of tweaks and stuff to this plow to make it plow exactly like they wanted. Modified hitch. A lot of history in this plow, and it sat in an old barn that was dirty. It sank in the mud. These are the tires that were on it. They're still holding. The one over on the land's got a slow leak, but kind of surprised Dad didn't take a little better care of it considering what it meant to him. But it was out of the rain and the sun, but it still got a lot of moisture, and so a lot of the paint rusted away. And so I want to get this one restored up to match the Super 88 that he pulled it with. You've seen it in my tractor tour video, but here's the Super 88 that Dad plowed with for his plowing contest. Still own it. We restored it in, I believe it was winter of 91, 92. I have more of these shares in my basement. They would switch them out at the drop of a hat. These competitions were so serious that if they were just starting to get the slightest bit dull, they would swap them out. And so there's a bunch down there that they figured thought they would use them later and never got around to it. But they're a longer share that has been torched down to a 2-bolt share, but still cuts wider. I don't know if I have, if I find, I'll look and see if I've got any video footage of me plowing with this. I've taken it to a couple plow days. I know Dad did. It's quite the plow. When he went to, the second time he won, he went to Austria. And he practiced with this here, but Oliver was a little tighter with the purse springs by then. White had bought Oliver. Just wasn't spending the money on that kind of promotional stuff as much. And so he ended up using a Ford tractor and plow over in Austria, but he still was practicing with this here. And he said, and over there they looked for each furrow slice to have its own little peak. And the idea was it helped catch moisture from blowing snow. And then the other thing I've heard, it was an old technique from way back where each peak would kind of give a little valley, of course, and then they would go out and spread their seed by hand, and then they could take a team of horses, oxen, whatever, with just a log and drag that across, and it would knock the peaks down and bury the seed. And that was their planner way back. And it's just one of those things, a tradition that's kind of kept on, and that's what they were looking for out of the plowing competition when Dad was doing it.